Hello and welcome to Spencer's Library. I'm Claudia and today I'm reviewing Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. Yes, it is Strange Case and not The Strange Case for some unfathomable reason. And every time I see the title without the, it bothers me inside. So I'm going to be referring to this book as Jekyll and Hyde. I'm sure I'm the first person ever to do so. Jekyll and Hyde is a tiny little book. It's a novella. It was published in 1886. It is really very short. It's very much a 1 or 2 sitting read. So if you're craving a bit of Victorian Gothic, this might be the perfect read for you. Jekyll and Hyde is not just a book, it has since become a cultural phenomenon. This idea of the embodiment of the duality of man, of good and evil existing in the same person, etc., etc. This idea of Jekyll and Hyde is one that we're all aware of, that has made it into our pop culture. But with this book, we can explore the very origins of it. Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, to give it its proper title, One Last Time, follows a London lawyer by the name of Mr. Utterson, whose client and close friend is the well-respected surgeon Dr. Henry Jekyll. Utterson is worried that Dr. Jekyll might be getting blackmailed by his young protege by the name of Mr. Hyde. And this theory seems to be supported by the fact that Dr. Jekyll, in his will, plans to leave all his possessions to Mr. Hyde after his death. And also by one occurrence in which Dr. Jekyll writes a large check to the family of a young child who has been injured by Mr. Hyde when he carelessly tramples over the young girl in the street. Jekyll, however, does not want to discuss Mr. Hyde with his friend and lawyer, or indeed with Dr. Lanyon, who's another friend of theirs and a fellow surgeon. Utterson and Lanyon theorize about the relationship between gentle, well-respected, middle-aged Dr. Jekyll and the rough, cruel and younger man that is Mr. Hyde. But the stakes are raised when Mr. Hyde is actually witnessed to be committing murder, and he subsequently vanishes. Utterson and Lanyon suspect that maybe Dr. Jekyll is actually hiding the fugitive and protecting him from the law. I won't spoiler how the actual plot of the story develops, but obviously you who are watching this video already know the big plot twist. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde turn out to be the very same person. As a story, Jekyll and Hyde is a bit Part of that is to do with the way the story unfolds in the book, and that is this very typical for the Victorian era fashion of getting the juicy bits only secondhand. So a lot of the plot doesn't unfold before the reader's eyes, but in fact is told in random letters or diary entries, or is recapped by one person in conversation with another. We see the story mostly through the eyes of Mr. Utterson, who's a very bland vessel. He's not really a character as such. His only defining character trait is caring for his friend Dr. Jekyll and also wanting to find out what happens. Until the very end, we don't actually know what's going on in Dr. Jekyll's mind. This could have been an interesting device for telling the story, but it isn't. If you've read other Victorian or even earlier fiction from the 19th and 18th century, you're familiar with that style of writing. I guess it was popular at the time to not be right there as the action unfolds, but to sort of get everything secondhand. If you're not familiar with it, you might find it a bit jarring. Other than that, the book is actually very readable. The style is easygoing. It doesn't feel dense or convoluted or heavy like some other 19th century books do. So I think this is quite suitable for someone who's new to Victorian literature or new to classics in general. So if you're curious about it, don't be put off by that weird way in which the story is structured, because it is actually quite readable and it's also a very quick read. However, the real interest in this story isn't in the plot itself, right? It's in this idea of Jekyll and Hyde as two personalities within the same person. It's in the origin of this cultural phenomenon that is Jekyll and Hyde, the idea of it. Because this novella is one of the most impactful works of early science fiction and has influenced the genre to this day. Stevenson's take on this idea of a suppressed secret identity is one that we see over and over again in 19th century fiction, from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein way earlier in the century to Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray, which was published after Jekyll and Hyde. As a story, though, Jekyll and Hyde is nowhere near the same levels as the two examples I've just mentioned. For that, it's much too short, it's much too rough around the edges, it's not a masterpiece in the same way. It doesn't go deep enough into the philosophy, but it explores the same ideas. The monster Hyde, much like Frankenstein's creature or Dorian Gray's portrait, is a physical manifestation of the dark side of human nature, obviously taking a different approach to it. Whereas Frankenstein's creature, for example, is the pure, untouched, raw side of the human, shaped by its environment and shaped by society. Hyde is an inherently dark aspect of human personality. But because we're in Victorian times, what exactly makes up that dark side isn't really expanded upon or explored with the amount of detail that the modern reader craves. There's murder, yes, but murder is, I guess, the socially acceptable vice here. More interesting are the shrouded little hints we get at the sins of sexuality, of excess and forbidden pleasures, and all of that good stuff, which is only vaguely hinted at but never expanded on. Unfortunately, Jekyll and Hyde is much too short to really get into the philosophy of this split or dual personality. This idea that there's two sides to every one of us and the dangers of letting the dark side take over. The potential is there, but the execution is sadly a bit lacking. And maybe that's a bit too much to expect from this kind of book anyway. Jekyll and Hyde is one of the classic penny dreadfuls. It's a story that's meant to shock and entertain for a very small price. You're supposed to buy it, to read it, to be mildly scandalized, and then move on to the next shocking tale. I love exploring the origins of genre fiction, the origins of, detective novels, or of romances, or of horror novels, or in this case of dark science fiction. And if you do as well, you will get a lot out of Jekyll and Hyde. If you're after a well-plotted story, then this is not it. But the potential is there, and you can see how Jekyll and Hyde has come out of this mediocre penny dreadful to become a cultural phenomenon, and an idea that's gripping us to this day, so that we see endless iterations and spin-offs and adaptations and developments of this idea. And it's fun to go back and see where it all began. So, do I recommend this book? Yes, but you have to approach it with the right sort of attitude. Don't expect a masterpiece a la Frankenstein. Don't expect a deep dive into philosophical thought a la The Picture of Dorian Gray. Don't even expect a good, gripping science fiction tale. Don't even expect a good, gripping science fiction tale a la H.G. Wells. What this is a truly fascinating concept spun into a bit of a mediocre and underdeveloped story. A concept, however, that has stuck around for well over a century. As I said before, this is a really short read. It's not a difficult read. It doesn't require a lot of the reader. So if you're curious, just get the novella and give it a little go. You'll either put it away after the first chapter, or you read it in 1 or 2 sittings and be glad that you did. I certainly am. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!